and I heard his footsteps. I shivered when I heard his footsteps.
I feared those steps. I heard those steps upstairs. He wouldn't sleep. He would walk around. First thing in the morning, he would walk out of the villa at 6 o'clock and I would hear shooting. He had the urge to kill, like an animal.
I still remember watching Schindler's List in school. I was 12, maybe younger, but the movie affected me so deeply that I carried it with me for years. One character in particular really scared me, Amon Göth. The way Ralph Fiennes portrayed him was truly disturbing, but years later I realized that the reality was even worse. The movie didn't even come close to showing what kind of monster Amon Göth really was. So I started looking deeper into his story. I wanted to understand how a person could become capable of something like that. It all begins on December 11, 1998. On that cold winter day, a boy is born, Amon Leopold Göth. Göth grows up in Vienna, in the district of Gumpendorf. His parents quickly agree on his first name. It's a name that has long been a tradition in the family. Amon, or Amun, comes from ancient Egyptian mythology. He was known as ram-headed god, a powerful creator figure associated with life and fertility. As Amon-Re, he later became one of the most important gods in Egypt. For his middle name, he is given Leopold, to distinguish him from his father, grandfather and uncle. His aunt Käthe, who had no children of her own, became one of the closest people in his life. She adored Amon and gave him the nickname Moni. His parents, Amon Franz Göth and Bertha Göth, worked their way up from modest beginnings. Bertha Göth even established a book and art business. Over time, the company becomes successful. The family earns good money. They can afford a maid, even a car. Amon's father is seen as a man of the world. He travels a lot, speaks fluent English and places great importance on discipline and proper conduct. In 1915, Moni starts going to school. By then, World War I has already been raging for a year. He attends a private Catholic primary school. His parents want him to grow up with the values that guide their own lives: faith in God, hard work, decency and respect for the law. They expect him to follow in their footsteps one day and take over the business they built with so much effort. From an early age, Moni feels the weight of these expectations. It is a pressure that never really leaves him. Moni was not a model student, his father would later say, a polite way of describing the frustration caused by his school performance. There is little doubt that Moni was intelligent and talented in many ways. What he lacked was discipline and a real interest in learning. He wanted only one thing: to break free from the narrow world of his Catholic middle-class upbringing. His parents felt overwhelmed, so they chose a solution that was not uncommon for families in Vienna at the time. After 5 years of primary school, they sent him to the countryside to a boarding school. There, in a quite small town far from the temptations of Vienna, he was supposed to attend secondary school and lay the foundation for a successful future. The boarding school was known as a strict environment, a place meant to shape difficult students, but even the rigid discipline of the institution could not break Moni's rebellious nature. If anything, it may have shaped him further in a darker direction. Some believe that his later tendency towards strange and cruel behavior can already be traced back to this period of his life. What follows is a practical decision. Bertha and Amon Franz Göth bring their son back into the family business. He is supposed to train as a bookseller and at least be prepared to take over the company one day. But before Moni returns to Vienna, something happens that changes his path. A friend takes him to a meeting of young nationalist groups who had recently become active in the region. For Moni, it is the beginning of a new world, a world shaped by hatred and struggle, a world in which the enemy is clearly defined. In 1925, at the age of 17, he joins a local branch of nationalist youth organization in Weidhofen an der Thaya. The constant propaganda and extreme ideas soon become part of his own thinking. Within the group, he gains recognition. His physical strength and presence are valued. For the first time, he feels needed. He begins to see himself as a part of a larger mission, as someone who is meant to fight, to belong, and to take part in shaping the future. With this step, Moni has found a direction. He now sees himself as a fighter, and he fully commits to the ideology that will define the rest of his life. With Hitler's early release from prison in Landsberg on December 20, 1924, his supporters in Austria gain new momentum. Now that their leader has returned, his energy, determination and sense of purpose begin to inspire others once again. For many followers, this is a turning point, and step by step, Amon is drawn further in. He is impressed by this sense of action and conviction. Gradually, his worldview becomes more defined. He begins to accept the racial ideology of the nationalist movement as a guiding principle in his thinking. But in 1927, at the age of 19, Göth makes another shift. He leaves the youth Nazi groups and joins the 5th Company of a nationalist paramilitary organization in Vienna. Moni likely believes that this group offers stronger support and more concrete action than the still relatively weak Nazi movement at the time. In fact, in the Austrian elections of early 1927, the Nazis receive very little support and are not yet taken seriously as a political force. Alongside the sense of adventure he found among his marching comrades, Göth was still searching for an alternative to working in the family business. Around this time, he reconnects with old contacts from the nationalist scene and slowly begins to reorient himself. By 1929, he is once again moving in circles close to the Nazis, at first only as a sympathizer. But on May 13, 1931, Göth officially joins the Nazi Party. Becomes a member of the local group in Vienna and is assigned a membership number. Soon after, he is transferred to another local branch, where he begins to take on his first roles within the movement, both politically and as part of the SR. From the SR, it's not far for him to join the SS. At a meeting, he is deeply impressed by the confident and disciplined appearance of the SS. It leaves such an impact on him that he decides to join immediately. From that moment on, he carries an SS identification number. He begins his service in a local SS unit, where he performs his duties to the satisfaction of his superiors. By January 1933, he is transferred to the staff of a larger SS formation. There he takes on responsibilities as an adjutant and is also put in charge of a motor unit. As someone who holds multiple driving licenses and has a strong interest in automobiles, he is seen as a perfect fit for this role. When Hitler takes power in Germany in 1933, it causes huge excitement among his supporters in Austria. Göth is already 24 at the time and a committed follower of the Nazis. But in July 1933, after Nazi bombing in Krems, Göth is wanted by Austrian authorities and flees to Munich. He is suspected of being involved in the attack. In Munich, he takes part in smuggling communication devices into Austria and works as a courier. But in October 1933, he is arrested by Austrian police. But due to lack of evidence, he is released shortly before Christmas. By now, his parents are deeply concerned about his dangerous behavior. To distract him, they come up with an unusual idea. They introduce him to a young woman who is willing to marry him. Her name is Olga Januszek, a bank employee born in Vienna in 1995, almost 4 years older than him. Surprisingly, Moni accepts the idea without much resistance. When he returns home in December 1933, wedding preparations begin. On January 7, 1934, they marry in the Karlskirche in Vienna. But it quickly becomes clear that the relationship does not work. Göth feels drawn back to his SS comrades, and the marriage soon begins to fall apart. In March 1936, his mother Bertha dies of breast cancer. This is a heavy blow for both father and son. At the same time, they have to keep the family business running. Göth shows determination. He takes new books and goes into cafes, bars, selling them directly to customers. There is also a telling story from this time. Göth is sitting in a cafe and talking to an attractive red-haired woman. They got along well, until a friend quietly tells him that she is Jewish. Göth immediately turns away and leaves without a word. Selling books does not satisfy him for long. Soon, he heads west again toward the Third Reich. In the summer of 1937, he appears in Munich again with an old comrade. Officially, he is there for professional reasons. In reality, he is once again active within the SS. For the first time, he runs into problems with a superior. Due to serious disagreements, he is temporarily removed from duty. However, the situation resolves itself shortly after. Then comes the turning point. In March 1938, Austria is annexed by Nazi Germany. Göth returns to Vienna. In October 1938, he marries again. His new wife is Anna Geiger, called Annie. She's athletic, confident, and fits the ideal image of an SS wife. In 1939, Göth leaves the church and describes himself as believer in God, a common term among SS members. With the outbreak of war, priorities change. The family business shifts away from religious items and focuses on military literature. The company grows quickly and becomes very profitable. In July 1939, their son Peter is born, but in February 1940, tragedy strikes. The child dies from a diphtheria infection. Only 1 month later, in March 1940, Göth joins the Waffen-SS. He leaves his family and is sent to Upper Silesia. He becomes part of a special SS unit and works in administrative roles in the occupied territories. At first, his tasks seem ordinary. He later claims he was dealing with the registration of animals and logistics, but his role is part of a much larger system. Göth now serves under Heinrich Himmler, helping to build what the Nazis called the New Order in Europe. He has all the traits for a rapid career in the SS. He is ambitious, disciplined, and ruthless. He sees himself as part of a historical mission, someone chosen to reshape the world. In this system, violence becomes a value. Those who are not willing to be brutal cannot rise. Göth proves that he is willing. In September 1940, he briefly returns to Vienna. Strangely, he does not stay with his family, but in a hotel. Soon after, he returns to his post. In January 1941, he is promoted within the SS. Around this time, his wife gives birth to their daughter Ingeborg. At first, Göth is disappointed that it is not a son. But when he later sees her, he becomes attached to her. He continues working in SS structures, including resettlement operations. During this time, he also reconnects with people from his past. One incident stands out. During a joke, he trips a strong former athlete named Franz Grün. Grün responds with a powerful throw, knocking Göth to the ground. Göth reacts with anger and says he will not forget this. At the time, it sounds like a threat, but later it becomes something much more serious. On July 14, 1941, SS Sturmbannführer Otto Winter issues an official evaluation for Göth. The report praises him highly. It describes him as politically reliable, ideologically committed, and free from any religious ties. From this point on, Göth's rise within the SS accelerates. On November 9, 1941, he is promoted to SS Untersturmführer, roughly equivalent to a second lieutenant. But his biggest rise is still ahead of him. However opened the way for him to the east, that is where his real ascent begins. Göth is considered an excellent organizer. In August 1942, he arrives in Lublin. There he lives and works in the Julius Schreck barracks, which now serves as headquarters for the man behind Aktion Reinhardt. He becomes part of the staff of SS Brigadeführer Odilo Klobochnik. Inside the circle, the mass murder of Jews in occupied Poland is carefully planned and brutally carried out. Göth's first assignment is the expansion of the labor camp Butzen, near Krasnik. Barracks for 2,000 forced laborers are to build there. At the same time, the so-called final solution in Poland is moving forward rapidly. Tens of thousands of people are shot. Ghettos are created and later liquidated. Countless people die during these operations. Men and women considered fit for work are sent to labor camps. The elderly, children, and infants are often shot on the spot or deported to examination camps like Belzec. Göth is now directly involved in these actions. He commands his men, organizes elections, and decides who will live and who will die. One example is the ghetto of Belzec, southwest of Lublin. Around 700 Jews are supposed to be deported to Majdanek, but about 500 manage to bribe Göth. Instead of instant death, they are sent to the forced labor camp in Busin. According to testimony given after the war by Mitek Pemper, the SS loot in Belzec is enormous. Göth allegedly accepts furs, jewelry, leather goods and other valuables in exchange for sparing people from deportation. At some point, however, his corruption is discovered. Even in 1943, correspondence about the affair still exists. The events in Belzec established Göth's reputation as a corrupt SS officer. By now, he fully understands the business opportunities hidden inside mass murder. Documents from this time show that Göth is responsible for forced labor deployment within Globocnik's staff. Around this period, he also meets Reinhold Feix, one of the most brutal SS killers in the region. Feix, originally a hairdresser from the Sudetenland, serves in the examination camp Belzec in 1942. Later, he becomes commander of the Busin labor camp. Witnesses later state that Göth remains in close contact with him, even during his later time in Płaszów. Many historians believe Göth learned much about organized killing from men like Feix. Globocnik soon notices Goeth's organizational skills. In early summer 1942, he gives Göth authorization to buy materials in Ostrava and other cities in Moravia for what are described as secret Reich construction projects. Metik Pemper later suspects these materials may have been intended for the crematoria in the examination camps. This theory is strengthened by another document. In June or July 1942, Globocnik sends a letter to the commanders of Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka, ordering them to allow Göth access to the camps. Metek Pemper later believes Göth may also have been tasked with overseeing or recording the valuables stolen from murdered Jews. While Göth gains experience in Aktion Reinhardt, the SS officially recognizes what has already become reality. On August 13, 1942, Göth is formally assigned to the higher SS and police leader East as a specialist officer of the Waffen-SS. In autumn 1942, Göth arrives at his next assignment, Poniatowa, southwest of Lublin. Once again, his job is to build and organize a camp for Jewish forced laborers. And once again, he proves himself an efficient camp manager. In October 1942, the first Jews arrive in Poniatowa. By January 1943, around 1,500 forced laborers are already imprisoned there, including Jews from Vienna and Slovakia. Göth plans a camp for 9,000 workers. By summer 1943, more than 10,000 prisoners are held there. They work mainly in the textile factories of Walter Turbans, producing uniforms for the German Wehrmacht. Originally, Płaszów was a forced labor camp. It was established in the summer of 1940 under the direction of Horst Pilasek on land southeast of Kraków. That included limestone quarries and two old Jewish cemeteries. The location was completely unsuitable for a camp. The ground was rocky, hilly, and partly swampy, but the camp was built there because the Nazis wanted to exploit the limestone quarries. To pave the camp roads, the SS forced prisoners to use Jewish gravestones taken from the destroyed cemeteries. At first, Catholic Poles were the main forced laborers in Płaszów. From 1941 onward, Jews were also brought in the camp. By January 1943, around 2,000 forced laborers were imprisoned there. Most of them worked for the SS company Deutsche Ausrüstungswerke or DAW. The first commandant, Horst Pilasek, was described by Metik Pemper as a primitive man with stomach problems and serious alcohol addiction. When drunk, he became unpredictable. In December 1942, Pilasek was removed from office and replaced by SS-Hauptscharführer Franz Josef Müller. After the war, Müller wrote a report in which he describes a remarkable story with his superior. Scherner gave me the assignment to build a barracks camp as a replacement ghetto up on the high ground behind the Jewish cemetery. I set up a construction office, took on a Jewish architect and drew up a plan in which I foresaw everything. Barracks with washrooms for families, a school, a kindergarten and so on. The architect worked out the plan and I submitted it to the SS and police leader. How that man raged and what he called me. What are you thinking? Kindergarten? School? Washrooms for families? Do you think we want to raise Jews? He tore my plan apart and said, nothing but a barracks camp for the Jews we still need. Everything else will be destroyed and you wear an SS uniform and still feel sorry for these parasite people? But Müller was too slow when it came to building the camp. He was also fairly soft towards the Jewish forced laborers, even granting them breaks when no direct superior was in the camp. Ultimately, this led to his removal as well. Now, the job was to be handled by a man who would show no mercy and no leniency, someone who would stop at nothing. Amon Göth. On 11 February 1943, he arrived. Göth liked Płaszów because here he could be his own master, here he could create his own kingdom. And with a little cunning, he could make a fortune here. So he left no doubt about his intentions when he took up his reign in Płaszów. I'm your god, he declared to the prisoners lined up in the roll call square to receive him. A prisoner recalled a sentence of Göth. In the Lublin district, I finished off 60,000 Jews. Now it's your turn. The prisoners were soon to feel the cruel harshness and inhumanity of the new master. The camp was now expanded. The Polish families living nearby were thrown out of their houses, brutally and without consideration. Working conditions were vile and cruel. Göth threatened prisoners with being shot if construction projects were not completed. He deliberately kept the time frames for the building work short. Right at the beginning, 2 Jewish doctors were taken aback by Göth's ambivalent behavior. The 2 physicians approached him with a request. When they arrived, he was polite and obliging, even offered them a cigarette, and finally asked what they wanted. The doctors put their case. They wanted to persuade Göth to build a hospital. Göth, however, did not really let them speak, saying instead that he still had a great deal to do and to build in the camp. Płaszów, after all, served as a labor camp for German companies. Göth added that he wanted the workers to be well and properly fed. One of the doctors noticed during the conversation that Göth no once used the word Jew or prisoner. Göth presented himself as a friendly organizer, also as a patient when he showed his leg on which several ulcers could be seen. When X-ray therapy for the ulcers was recommended, Göth assured them he would get a good X-ray machine. He also said he wanted a vaccination against typhus, since the low resistance of the Germans to typhus was well known, especially in concentration camps. Afterwards, the doctors returned to the barracks and reported on the conversation. While the other prisoners, among them other doctors, were satisfied, one of the doctors began to have doubts. He said he had found the conversation perfidious and utterly cynical. They did not believe Göth would keep his word, but to their further surprise, Göth did put the plans for a new hospital into effect. 3 barracks were converted into a small hospital, with fine windows and quarters for the doctors. And then the bad feeling of one of the doctors was confirmed after all. By chance, he saw on a list the planned food rations for the prisoners: 2,200 to 2,500 calories a day. Far too little for people doing heavy labor. A few days later, Göth summoned the 2 doctors and several of their colleagues. This time, the tone was different. Göth was curt and simply explained the layout of the hospital. Nothing was left of the friendliness of the first meeting. And then, one day in March, Göth showed his true, malignant face for the first time. In front of the assembled prisoners, he shot 2 couples because they had let 2 girls escape. Göth took off his hat, filled it with the blood, handed it to another prisoner and said, "Now you're in command." The hat would go on to play a large role because the prisoners quickly recognized a pattern. If Göth wore a simple soldier's field cap, there was less to fear from him. He became dangerous when he put on his officer's cap or even his Tyrolean hunting hat. People knew someone would probably die. Prisoners compared him to a predator hunting prey. One prisoner later recalled hiding in a camp latrine during Göth's hunting trips through the camp because Göth never entered the toilets. He often walked in the barracks and did not leave until he had shot several prisoners. The brutality escalated quickly. The 2 girls who had escaped were eventually found and brought back to Göth. The names were Erika and Rega. They had permission to leave the camp briefly to enter the ghetto, but they stayed there too long and were arrested. Many prisoners hoped the girls would only be whipped, but Göth wanted to make an example of them. The girls were almost children. They were publicly hanged before all the inmates. First, they were whipped and their wounds treated with iodine. Until the very end, the girls did not know they were going to die. A capo was ordered to carry out the execution. He did not even have proper ropes available, so Erika and Rega were hanged using leather belts. One of the belts snapped. Göth ordered the girl to be hanged again and then fired additional shots into her hanging body. A German camp orchestra played music during the execution. Göth himself had chosen the song "Komm zurück" by Rudi Schurike. Even Steven Spielberg and Schindler's List could only show a fraction of Göth's true brutality. One of Göth's most famous murders, the killing of Diana Reiter, appears in the movie, but their real background is often missing. Like Hitler, Göth had a fascination with architecture. This may explain his strange relationship with the Jewish architect Sigmund Grünberg, who supervised much of the camp construction in Płaszów. Göth admired Grünberg's intelligence and skill. He reportedly told him, "You will live here like a king if you fulfill all my wishes." Yet Göth also blamed Grünberg for every problem in the camp. He beat him and repeatedly threatened to kill him. Grünberg survived only because he was protected by SS commander Julius Scherner. Mythic Pemper later believed Göth hated Grünberg because Göth himself wanted to become an architect after the war. This obsession may also explain the murder of Diana Reiter. Like in Schindler's List, she was responsible for supervising construction work on barrack and SS guard building. One day a crack appeared in a wall. Göth summoned Diana Reiter and demanded an explanation. He listened to her for a few minutes before exploding with rage over what he called Jewish nonsense. Then he shouted to his subordinate Albert Huyard, "Shoot this shitty engineer." Other prisoners later said they saw something new in Göth after killings like this, a strange sense of satisfaction. In letters to his father and SS friends, Göth would later write, "Now I am finally my own commander." Only a few days later, on Saturday, March 13, 1943, the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto begins. Göth, who had already gained experience in the clearing of other ghettos, throws himself into the operation with brutal determination. One witness later remembered the appearance of the bloodthirsty SS officer. He was a tall, handsome man with a powerful body and thin legs, a well-proportionate head and blue eyes. He wore a black leather coat. In one hand he held a riding whip, and beside him were his 2 dogs. On that day, Göth and his men moved through the ghetto like demons. Mothers were torn away from their children, residents were shot at random, people were violently driven out of the ghetto and forced toward an uncertain fate. The former Płaszów commandant, Hans-Josef Müller, who was now responsible for one of the subcamps, later described what he witnessed. The marching column seemed endless. Mothers cried and held their children to their chests one last time. Some people were only half dressed, others still wore pajamas. At the end came a picture I can never forget. First, there were 2 large horse wagons with rubber wheels filled with the corpses. Behind them came several smaller wagons, also loaded with bodies. Blood ran from the wagons, and for days a trail of blood covered the road from the ghetto to the concentration camp. At the very end of the procession drove the tyrant of the camp in his car, Amon Göth. One person who would later play an important role in Göth's life managed, through pure luck, to get onto a wagon bound for Płaszów. Otherwise, she would likely have been deported with the others to the examination camp Belzec. The result of the ghetto liquidation was devastating. Around 100 people were murdered during those 2 days alone, while roughly 4,000 were deported. About half of them were sent to Auschwitz. As befits any ruler, this one deserved a home worthy of his status. In the beginning, Göth lived in a house next to the camp kitchen, but not for long. Soon he moved into the so-called Untersturmführerhaus, not far from the camp's main entrance. It would go down in the camp's history of the Red House, a building with bare, rough brick walls. Göth wasn't the only one living there. His hardcore of killers shared that place with him: Leonard John, Albert Huyard, Edmund Strojewski and Franz Grün. But this official residence was nowhere near enough for Göth. It had to be a villa, and of course, no proper ruler is complete without a loyal entourage, so he began to build his own. First, he needed a capable secretary for the commandant's office. He summoned 2 prisoners who had been recommended to him. One of them was a 23-year-old student from Krakow named Mythic Pemper, who also spoke German. Perfect for Göth, who also needed an interpreter. It didn't take long for Göth to realize what kind of sharp, capable young man he had in his office. Pemper had studied law and accounting at the same time in Krakow. The only place he failed was the interrogation barrack. Later, in his book he would write, "My horror and shock at the cruel methods of the SS shook me so deeply that instead of translating, I simply repeated the tortured man's cries of pain, word for word, in Polish." Göth forgave him his weakness. He had already seen what Pemper could do for him, so the commandant began to push more and more of his bureaucratic work onto the young prisoner. And this gave Pemper something rare, a deep insight into how Płaszów was run. He used it well. He secured his own position, and he managed to get his father, who had a leg injury, a place in the bakery commando. Göth needed him, even though, at first, he didn't trust him. He had Pemper followed to make sure he wasn't telling anyone what he knew, what he was doing for the commandant. But Pemper was smart enough to earn Göth's trust, and so between the 2 of them, a strange kind of relationship began to form. Pemper worked so closely with Göth that he became a constant witness to his outbursts. He knew Göth killed whenever he felt like it, even in the middle of dictating a letter. Pemper later wrote, "While he was speaking, he glanced into the mirror outside his window, the one he used to watch the area in front of the barrack. Suddenly he stood up, took one of the rifles from the wall, threw open the window. I heard a few shots, then only screams. And as if a phone call had simply interrupted the dictation, Göth came back to his desk and asked now where we were." Pemper also wrote Göth's private letters to his SS friends in Lublin, letters to his family, in the letters to his father. Göth still showed a real interest in the family publishing business, even suggesting ideas for new projects. He played the concerned son, asking how his father's hay fever was doing. But about the violence in the camp, about the killings, not a single word. He behaved much the same in the letters to his wife Annie, even though he was cheating on her constantly. He played the faithful husband. He bragged about his son. When his wife wrote that the boy Werner had been hitting his sister Ingeborg, Göth dictated this reply to Pemper. "The hitting, well, Werner probably gets that from me." But despite the strange closeness, despite the sympathy, Pemper had no illusions. He saw himself as a dead man walking. It was only a question of time. And he knew that when Göth finally killed him, Göth would also kill his entire family, because the commandant lived by a simple rule: an unhappy worker doesn't do good work, so the rest of the family had to die too. Otherwise they would hate Göth for the death of their loved one. And so Pemper did everything he could to stay in the good grace of the man who would one day kill him. Every morning the camp was woken by the horn of Wilhelm Wilhelmus Rosner. Every morning at 7. At 12 his horn called the prisoners to lunch. At 12:30 back to work. Wilhelmus Rosner was the only prisoner allowed to wear a watch, so he would always be on time, and he never missed a single call. But sometimes the horn meant something else, something worse, an execution. For a wannabe despot like Göth, order and discipline in his little kingdom were everything. The punishments were brutal. If a prisoner managed to escape, Göth would line up the others for roll call and shoot every 10th man in the group. The same way Romans used to do it when a soldier fell asleep on watch. Decimation. To keep himself and his men in good spirits, Göth threw regular parties at his villa. And from this time, there's one famous story. Two Jewish brothers, Hermann and Poldek Rosner, were gifted musicians. They were forced to play at these parties again and again. One evening, they performed a heavy Hungarian melody, Gloomy Sunday. This song had the reputation for driving young men to take their own lives. The Rosner brothers played it. And then they played it again and again, until one of the SS men dragged himself out onto the balcony and shot himself in the head. "I was so happy," Hermann Rosner would later remember, "that I had killed a German." Göth gathered around him a reliable camp crew, and at least as ruthless as he was himself. A few of them stood out. One was an old comrade Göth remembered well, Franz Grün, and Grün was not far behind his master. He quickly became one of the most feared men in the camp, just like Göth. He was trigger-happy and merciless. He liked to wear a side cap, and when he walked, he let his hands dangle in front of him. That's why the prisoners gave him the nickname Malpa, monkey. Göth and Grün had a friendly relationship. Göth even took boxing lessons from him. Then there was SS-Untersturmführer Leonard John. He stood out for his strange appearance, a high, feminine voice, thin legs, and a huge belly. The prisoners called him Alibaba, and he had a cruel habit. At night he would lie in wait for women on their way to the latrines and punish them in brutal ways. And like Göth, he wanted to get rich. He was one of the most eager when it came to stealing Jewish furniture and valuables. The young man from Pomerania, Edmund Strejewski, was absolutely loyal to Göth, even though deep down he was afraid of Göth. Strejewski had no limits when it came to killing. On Goeth's orders, he even murdered his own Jewish lover, a woman named Wolf, without a moment's hesitation. And finally, Albert Houchard. He was a fixed part of Goeth's circle of terror, something like his right hand. Like an Egyptian pharaoh, Amon Göth kept an entire palace staff of slaves. One of these slaves was Helen Sternlicht.
And I was assigned to clean barracks. It was the third day when one very tall SS walked into the barrack. This was Amon Göth, and he was the new commandant of Płaszów. I was cleaning a window. He stopped in front of me, and he said to the woman that took care of us, the orderly, he says, "I want her in my house." If a Jewish girl is smart enough to clean a window on a sunny day, she'll probably be good for me.
In those few seconds, Helen's fate was sealed. The very next day, she was brought to the commandant's house and put to work right away.
My first job was to iron his shirt. As I'm ironing the shirt, he slapped me so hard on my cheek. He said, "You stupid Jew, you don't even know how to iron a shirt properly." He says, "In Vienna, a girl your age knows how to iron a shirt, but you too dumb." And I started to cry. And he hit me so hard again. And that moment, I realized that I have to grow up. I'm no more child. I'm no more with my mother. I am here, and I have to obey.
Goethe called her Susanna to tell her apart from Helene Hirsch, whom he called Lena. Insults for her, slut, whore, dirty Jew. The words came at her again and again, and he hit her the moment something wasn't right. Sometimes for no reason at all. He didn't just slap her cheek, he hit her whole head. So Helen suffered from constant ringing in her ears, and her face was always swollen. One thing Helen could not miss: the satisfied look on Goethe's face when he heard her, the strange pleasure he seemed to take in her pain. As a Jew, she could never expect a word of praise for her work. That went against everything Goethe stood for. The Jew-hater, out of duty. When Ruth Calder, Goethe's mistress, once praised Helen, Goethe replied, "So what? Even if she does something right, even if she's actually nice, she's still a Jew, and I have to despise her." Helen shared a small room in the Red House with Helene Hirsch. It was next to the kitchen, 2 beds, maybe a dresser or a wardrobe, that was all. The 2 girls had to wear black dresses, and Susanna had another job too, looking after Goethe's 2 Great Danes, Ralph and Alf. He had trained them to hunt Jews.
And that's where he trained the dog.
Here?
Yeah, in the backyard.
There were 2 large dogs in the house. One was black and white spots named Ralph, and the other one was beige and brown, Alf. Ralph was his favorite dog that he trained to rip people apart. The scenes that I have seen those dogs done to people, I can't explain.
The rules in Goethe's mansion were brutal, especially in the kitchen. For the smallest mistake, 25 or 50 lashes with a whip on the bare backside, and for serious offenses, death. But what counted as a serious offense? One 80-year-old girl found out. Her crime? She had dared to look out of the kitchen window. So Goethe shot her. But with the stable boy, Isaac Grunwald, the commandant, got along well. They say Goethe would listen to the young man for hours whenever he talked about horses. Now and then Goethe even gave him cigarettes. And if the stories are true, Grunwald was once allowed to pat the chief on the shoulder and live to tell the tale. Beside horses, Goethe had another great love: cars. 3 of them were kept for him in a camp garage. A BMW Sports convertible, an 8-cylinder Ford and a 6-cylinder BMW sedan. Of course, these 2 were cleaned and cared by Jewish workers. One day, a Jewish woman was wiping the windshield of Goethe's car. He didn't like that, not at all. He turned to his driver and said, "What's this whore doing at my car? Take her out. Kill her." Later in court, Goethe would try to explain it away. He said weapons and grenades had been found in the car, and that was he had her shot. At some point, the prisoners began to call Goethe the Mamser. A Jewish word, it means son of a whore, bastard. The prisoners soon learned to read his rituals. When Goethe put on a white scarf, placed his 4-cornered cap on his head, and held his revolver in his hands, then they knew. An action was about to begin on the parade ground. Killing became routine. During one such action, the closing of Ghetto B in Kraków, 300 Jews were executed. Most of them were children, small children, some no older than 12. A survivor, Aaron Schwarz, remembered one moment for the rest of his life.
Ghettos and where they were destroyed. Now, when I came to Płaszów the first day, they did put me in a group where we were digging a huge grave, and the Krakow ghetto was at that time cleared, and they brought in trucks with children from infant to 12 years old, and they were all killed. And one group was digging further, about 100 feet of a long grave, about 50 feet wide.
The children were digging?
No, the group where I belonged. And the children, when they brought them in, they were shot and right in that grave. And of course, one group was bringing with a wheelbarrow some chlorine powder and putting on, because there was such a tremendous amount of bodies in those graves, and they were afraid that this might start smelling out. So one group was wheeling with a wheelbarrow some powder, chlorine powder, and spreading with a shovel over. One group was digging further, and one group was just covering up the ones which is true. A little girl, a beautiful blonde girl, sat down in the grave, dressed in a Eskimo white fur coat, was all bloody, and asked for a little bit of water, and asked water. But as you know, the heart was so like a stone, numb. You wouldn't dare go and give that child a little water. And this child swallowed so much blood because it was shot through the neck, and then it started to vomit so terribly. And then it laid down and it says, "Mother, turn me around, turn me around." And what
The mother was still alive?
Pardon?
The mother was still alive?
No. This child didn't know what happened to it. It was half shot, half dead. You know, it was after it was shot. And there was this child sat down in the grave between all the corpses.
The horror in the camp knew no limits. From the roof of one of the barracks where they happened to be working, 3 prisoners watched a massacre unfold below them, and they were forced to see something they would never forget. Some of the killers threw themselves on the dead women's bodies and defiled them. Göth was in charge of liquidation of Ghetto B. For days his men searched the houses for hidden Jews. Anyone who hadn't yet been taken away was shot. Anyone they found was killed on the spot. Sometimes the SS men took young girls. They locked them in a special barrack and abused them all night long. In the morning, they forced the girls outside naked. It was freezing cold. The camp was buried in fresh snow, and then they shot them. In Płaszów, the executions mostly took place on a hill called Ujova Gorka. The victims were brought there. They had to climb down into the pits, and then they were shot. There's one thing Amon Göth never forgets: taking care of himself. At the end of March 1943, he orders a massive search of the camp barracks. The search lasts for 24 hours. During that time, nobody's allowed to leave the barracks, not even to use the toilet. Göth and his men search everything carefully. Some prisoners actually manage to hide a few valuables from the greedy hands of the camp commandant. But many hiding places are still discovered. Anyone caught hiding valuables from the SS is shot immediately. In one barrack, Göth invents a cruel game. He places his cap on the only table in the room and orders the prisoners to fill it with gold and money. "I will not check who gives what," he says, "but if I find out that someone disobeyed my order, he will die immediately." Then he turns his back to the prisoners. When he turns around again, the cap is filled with gold coins, cash and diamonds. But Göth does not trust them. He orders an elderly man to be searched. Money is found hidden inside the man's socks. Göth does not hesitate for a second. He shots him. The bullet hits the man's artery and he slowly bleeds to death while choking on his own blood. The killing only excites Göth even more. Moments later, he shots another prisoner. Later, money is discovered on another inmate named Levi. Göth has him brought forward and begins beating him with a riding whip, demanding to know where the money came from. He beats him so brutally that Levi loses control of his body and soils himself. Göth then forces him up to clean up the excrement before ordering a Jewish police officer to hang him. As always, the entire camp is forced to watch, but during the execution, something goes wrong. The rope snaps. Levi desperately begs Göth for mercy, but Göth ignores him completely. Instead, he turns in rage toward the Jewish policeman. "You bastard, if this happens again, I will shoot you myself." Officially, all valuables taken from Jewish prisoners were supposed to be handed over to the Kraków office responsible for confiscated Jewish property, but Göth has no intention of giving up his treasures. Gold, money and diamonds are brought to his mansion instead, where he stores them inside a large safe that only he can open. Larger stolen items like furniture, paintings and carpets are harder to hide. This is where Odi chief Shilovich becomes useful. He sells these stolen goods for Göth on the Krakow black market and secretly keeps part of the profits for himself. For Göth, the camp becomes a gold mine. By July 1943, Secretary Pemper estimates that the wealth transported from the camp to Vienna already amounts to 10 million zloty. In July 1943, a rumor begins spreading through the Bochnia ghetto. People say that all Jews with American citizenship will be allowed to immigrate to the United States. At first, the rumor seems to be true. There's only one condition. A large payment must be made to the Gestapo headquarters in Krakow. The next day, around 100 people gather outside the security police building in Bochnia. Men, women and children, all supposedly holding American citizenship, arrive for their departure. Several trucks are already waiting for them. Even the head of the Krakow Gestapo is present. But the entire operation is a trap. When the people realize they have been deceived, panic breaks out. The Jews are forced onto the trucks. Even relatives who only came to say goodbye to their families are loaded onto the vehicles as well. Then the trucks begin moving, but not toward the train station as promised. Instead, they drive to the infamous Montelupich prison. The trap has closed. 2 days later, the prisoners are transported to Płaszów concentration camp. Göth has already been informed in advance. Before they arrive, he orders a mass grave to be dug near the Hujowa Gorka hill. Everything happens very quickly. After arriving at the camp, the prisoners are forced to undress and line up beside the grave. But before the execution begins, Göth forces them to run one final circle around the pit that will soon become the grave. Then the shooting starts. The victims fall into the trench one after another. According to witness reports, one mother desperately begs Göth to spare the life of her small daughter. Göth responds by shooting the child first. Then he turns to the mother and asks, "Then why did you have this child?" Moments later, he shoots her as well. Amon Göth is the kind of man who expects everyone around him to laugh at his jokes. He is especially proud of the cruel sayings he invents himself. Inside the so-called hunting room of his mansion, he hangs up one sentence that becomes the motto of his rule over Płaszów. Whoever shoots first gets more out of life. Göth rules the camp like a tyrant. He makes every decision alone, refuses criticism and cannot tolerate anyone beside him. This becomes especially clear in his constant rivalry with Franz Josef Müller, the commander of the nearby Gulag I labor camp. Göth is consumed by ambition and greed. He believes he understands how the Nazi system works. The more Jews he kills, the further he will rise. Soon killing becomes completely random. The only thing that sometimes decides life or death is what someone is wearing. Otherwise, anyone can become a target at any moment, no matter how hard they work. One day, Göth watches a group of women breaking stones. As he walks past them, he suddenly begins beating several women. One of them dies from the attack. And even at night, the prisoners are never safe. Göth often hides near the path leading to the latrines, waiting for the prisoners to pass by so he can shoot them. As a sadist, Göth enjoys watching the exact moment when normal life turns into pure terror. Witnesses later describe how fascinating he seemed by the fear in his victims' eyes. That brief second of disbelief before death. One incident becomes especially horrifying. Göth catches a Jewish woman secretly cooking a potato. Whatever the offense was, Göth immediately shoots her in the head. But she does not die instantly. Instead, Göth orders 2 prisoners to throw her into a large pot of boiling water. The woman screams and thrashes in an unbearable pain. Göth then orders the prisoners to place a lid on the pot. One of the men helping completely loses his nerves and tries to run away toward the bathhouse. Göth shoots him immediately. Another event shows just how brutalized the camp has become. Once again, 50 Jewish men and women are brought to the Hujowa Gorka to be executed. The prisoners are forced to undress beside the mass grave. Then Göth comes up with what witnesses later describe as a completely diabolical idea. To entertain himself and his men, he orders the prisoners to have sex with each other inside the pit. He promises that anyone who obeys will be allowed to live. It is freezing cold that day. Still, many of the mostly young prisoners begin obeying out of desperation. The guards standing above the pit watch the scene for several minutes, but eventually Göth Göth and his men decide to have seen enough. Then they open fire into the grave. One prisoner watching from a guard tower later says he fainted after witnessing the massacre. Other witnesses report that after such killings, Göth and his men often seemed strangely excited and euphoric. In the evenings, Göth would invite the shooters to his mansion, where they drank heavily until they lost consciousness. Göth does not spend all of his time in Płaszów. Not long after, he travels to Szczebin as part of an inspection tour. A new experiment is planned there. A large mixed camp for both Poles and Jews. Göth is supposed to take command of it. Using experienced craftsmen from Płaszów, he begins organizing the camp. More prisoners arrive over the following days, but it soon becomes clear the ambitious plans for the camp cannot be fully realized. Still, Göth visits Szczebin regularly, together with his friend and superior SS commander Schindler, and it is there that they indulge in some of their darkest excesses. Inside the castle of Szczebin, lavish parties are held. An SS officer often orders the camp orchestra to perform for the guests. The entertainment becomes increasingly cruel and degrading. Young Jewish women are brought into the halls, forced to undress and then chased around the tables with whips for the amusement of the SS men. One SS officer, Anton Scheidt, even suggests bringing the most beautiful Jewish woman from the camp and forcing her to have sex in front of the guests. According to witnesses, another officer named Anton Pospich eventually stops the plan from happening. Nevertheless, rumors about the orgies inside the castle slowly begin spreading back to Krakow, especially among Göth's political enemies. Another place Göth frequently visits is Bad Rabka, where he becomes friends with SS Hauptsturmführer Wilhelm Rosenbaum. Bad Rabka is described by witnesses as a true academy of murder. There, SS men are taught many of the killing methods later used throughout the concentration camps and examination operations. It is very possible that Göth himself already received part of his early training in mass murder there in 1942. While Göth's wife and children continued living in Vienna, he carried on countless affairs. These relationships became something more. Her name was Ruth Irene Calder. With a man like Göth, it is difficult to say that she truly won his heart, but she clearly held a special place in his life. She became his lover. Ruth was 25 years old and came from Upper Silesia. She was the daughter of a driving instructor. In Essen, Germany, she attended acting school and later earned a diploma as a beautician. During the war, she moved to Krakow, where she worked as a secretary for the Wehrmacht. She already had a reputation for enjoying the company of men in uniform. Later, Ruth would tell her daughter Monika that she was immediately fascinated by Göth. Tall, strong and confident, she saw him as a perfect man and could think of nobody else. Ironically, it was Oskar Schindler who introduced the two to each other. According to Ruth, Schindler even encouraged the relationship in hopes that Göth would continue supplying Jewish workers to Schindler's factories. Göth quickly becomes interested in her. At first, however, he remains suspicious, believing Schindler may have deliberately sent her to manipulate him, but after several meetings, the relationship begins. In the beginning, they try to keep some distance. Everyone knows Göth is married, and he explains to Ruth that divorce is impossible because of his children. Werner and Inge mean too much to him. In fact, he even brings a life-size portrait of his favorite daughter Inge from Vienna and hangs it inside the mansion. Eventually, Ruth moves into Göth's house. There, she is confronted with the brutal reality of camp life, where murder and torture are everyday events. She quickly realizes what role her dream man plays in it all. According to later accounts, Ruth, who claimed to hate violence, once threatened Göth with withholding intercourse. "If you don't stop killing Jews, I won't sleep with you anymore," she allegedly tells him. For a time, the threat seems to work. At least while Ruth is present, Göth no longer kills openly. Among the prisoners, who only know Ruth by the nickname Majola, she therefore gains a surprisingly positive reputation. Soon, the couple settles into a routine. After waking up, they often go horseback riding together before breakfast. Ruth gives instructions to servants for lunch, while Göth leaves for his duties in the camp. The couple lives extravagantly. Göth loves eating enormous amounts of meat, especially beef tartare, which he reportedly consumes in huge quantities. For dessert, cakes and pastries are prepared daily by a personal affectioner. After meals, Ruth and Göth often drink alcohol together or go riding again. Sometimes Ruth also plays tennis with the wives of other SS officers. In general, she enjoys a luxurious lifestyle. For the evening parties inside Göth's mansion, she often buys elegant dresses from Krakow's old town. Daily massages and facial treatments give her smooth skin something she is reportedly very proud of. At these parties, the newest records from Germany are played. Even jazz music, officially forbidden by the Nazis, is enjoyed, sometimes with live musicians. Years later, Ruth would describe her time with Göth in Płaszów as the happiest period of her life. Speaking to Israeli journalist Tom Segev, she says, "They will tell you that I owned a horse there and that I was a whore. It is true that I had relationships with many officers, but only until I found Göth, and he gave me a horse. I loved riding back then." Ah yes, Göth, what a dream of a man. It was a beautiful time. We enjoyed being together. My Göth was king and I was queen. Who wouldn't have enjoyed that? One day, Göth becomes so drunk that he barely knows what he is doing. Still, he has enough awareness left to call for Lena, Helen Hirsch. When a young woman enters the living room, she is horrified. Göth stands completely naked in the middle of the room, holding a whip, shouting orders and wildly gesturing. Without warning, he begins beating her. Then he tears the clothes from her body and forces himself on her. Helen screams for help, something she had never dared to do before. But this time, her tormentor seems to have completely lost control. Luckily for her, Ruth hears the screams from upstairs. Then she rushes to the horrible scene and pulls Göth away from Helen. Slowly, he regains control of himself. Helen later says in an interview, she is convinced Göth would have killed her if Ruth had not intervened. Helen Hirsch knows Göth better than almost anyone else. She witnesses firsthand how in the early days of his rule in Płaszów, he brings Polish prostitutes into the Red House. According to her, Göth is sexually insatiable, a man with enormous stamina who treats the women exactly as cruelly as he treats the prisoners. Göth also develops a strange obsession with the girls working for him. He sees them as personal property. Nobody is allowed to come close to them. They exist only to serve him. One day, during a gathering, a guest of Göth casually taps a young maid named Nusserreich on the shoulder while Göth is present. Göth immediately orders her to be taken outside and shot. The 19-year-old desperately begs for her life. She says she must take care of her younger brother, Dolek, who is still inside the camp. The SS men ask where her brother is working. When Nusser tells them the location of the workshop, they bring Dolek as well. The two siblings are taken to the Hujowa Korka and murdered in cold blood. The power over life and death slowly begins going to Göth's head. He becomes even more brutal and unpredictable than before. One day, he sets his Great Danes on a prisoner. The dogs literally tear the man apart. Afterward, Göth forces the other workers to look at the horrible, mutilated body. You pray to your god, he tells them, but he cannot help you. I, Göth, can kill all of you within 1 hour. Again and again, he murders prisoners completely at random, often for no reason at all. Simply to demonstrate his power. But besides killing, Göth has another passion: chess. Inside the camp, he finds a worthy opponent named Raimund Titsch, the manager of Julius Madrich's clothing factory. Madrich was one of the few businessmen who repeatedly tried to protect and help his Jewish workers whenever possible. During one chess match, Titsch quickly gains the upper hand against the camp commandant. Göth cannot handle the defeat. Suddenly he jumps up, flips the table over, grabs 2 revolvers and storms outside. He was ready to shoot every Jew he saw, Titsch later says in an interview. After that incident, Titsch changes his strategy. From then on, he secretly allows Göth to win every game without making it obvious. He also deliberately stretches the matches out for hours, sometimes 3 or 4 at a time. For the prisoners, these chess games become moments of relief, because as long as Göth is distracted, fewer people die. Titsch also has another hobby: photography. Secretly, he takes pictures of Göth inside the camp. Among them are some of the most famous images ever taken of the commandant, including the photograph of Göth sitting shirtless in a deck chair, and another showing him standing on the balcony with a rifle. Some of the photographs are even taken by Ruth herself. In several pictures her shadow can clearly be seen. But Titsch photographs much more than just Göth. He secretly captures images of female prisoners, soup distributions and forced labor columns marching through the camp. After the war, Titsch hides the photographs by burying them inside a park in Vienna. In 1963, he is visited by Holocaust survivor Leopold Poldek-Pfefferberg, who already knows about the existence of the photos. Pfefferberg buys the collection from Titsch for $500. Later, the 101 photographs are brought to Yad Vashem, where they are finally developed. Afterward, they are donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. Raimund Titsch dies 1 year later and is later honored as one of the righteous of Austria. The exact circumstances of the first meeting between Amon Göth and Oskar Schindler are unknown, but apparently the two men understand each other almost immediately. Not only were they both born in 98, Schindler also knows exactly how to bring out a different side of Göth, one that appears calmer, more reasonable, almost more human. The two men also shared certain traits. Both possesses the ability to manipulate people more powerful than themselves. Each in his own way knows how to impress others, gain favors, and put on a convincing performance, and both are intelligent enough never to lose sight of their true goals. Their contact quickly intensifies. Soon, Schindler becomes a welcome guest in Goeth's mansion. The two begin addressing each other informally. Oskar is even allowed to call him Moni. Schindler's expensive gifts and their attractive women accompanying him only increase Goeth's sympathy for him. In April 1943, Schindler successfully convinces Göth to approve a subcamp for the Jewish workers' of his enamel factory, Emalia. Years later, Goeth's daughter, born from his relationship with Ruth, claims that Göth always understood Schindler's true intentions. According to Ruth, Göth once supposedly told Schindler, "You know, Oskar, as far as I am concerned, you can even give them silver pillows. Just be more careful about it. Otherwise, all of us here might end in trouble." In 1999, historians discover a 7-page report inside what later becomes known as Schindler's Suitcase. The document, written for the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, entitled The Confessions of Mr. X, describes Schindler's relationship with Göth in detail. According to Schindler, maintaining the friendship is extremely expensive because Göth loves drinking French cognac. "When I visited him," Schindler writes, "I had to bring at least 5 or 6 bottles. One bottle alone cost 2,000 or 3,000 zloty. I went hunting with him. I drank with him. Between the bottles of liquor, I tried convincing him that murdering Jews was pointless and unnecessary." Schindler continues, "I believe I had some influence over him. I managed to obtain permission for Jews to work in my factory. I could personally choose which workers I wanted. That was a major achievement." At the same time, Schindler secretly has Göth spied on. His informant is Mietek Pemper, with whom Schindler regularly meets whenever Göth leaves the camp for inspections. From time to time, Göth also visits the Emalia factory himself, but he always announced these inspections beforehand, allowing Schindler to warn his Jewish workers in advance. Above all, absolute cleanliness is required because everyone knows the strange habits of His Excellency. If Göth notices even a single piece of paper on the ground, one of the workers may be forced to pick it up, using only his mouth. Whenever Göth enters a workshop, accompanied by Schindler and his guards, the Jewish workers are ordered to kneel. Sometimes Göth casually strikes one of them across the back with his whip while walking past. Yet in Schindler's presence, Göth never kills anyone. One day, Göth forces a Jewish worker named Moses Goldberg to clean his shoes. Goldberg performs poorly, but Göth spares him, most likely only because Schindler is standing beside him. Still, Schindler witnesses enough brutality himself. On one occasion, Göth orders one of his Great Danes named Rolf to attack a prisoner. The dog tears apart the man's thigh and genitals. In another testimony, Schindler later recalls how Göth once kicked a Jewish prisoner beneath the shovel of an excavator in a quarry, crushing the man to death beneath the machine. During a visit from higher SS and police leader Friedrich Krüger, Göth presents what appears to be a perfectly organized camp. The high-ranking SS officer is impressed. On July 28, 1943, Göth is promoted to SS Hauptsturmführer. At that point, nobody cares how Göth achieves these results. Within the SS, brutality and ruthlessness are rewarded. It does not matter that during the liquidation of the Tarnów ghetto, Göth shoots women and children in large numbers. According to one witness, he sweats heavily from the sheer amount of killing that day. It also does not matter when one of Göth's men, Franz Grün, tears a 1-year-old child from the arms of a Jewish mother who had secretly tried to hide it. Grün beats the baby with the handle of his pistol until it stops moving, then shoots it and throws the body onto the platform like garbage. That day alone, Göth kills 54 people, most of them are children. Afterward, someone brings him a bowl of water so he can wash his hands. His work is done. By the end of summer of 1943, mass executions at Hujowa Górka became almost routine. Groups of 20, 50, sometimes even 100 prisoners are shot there at a time. Meanwhile, Mietek Pemper learns that Germany's situation on the Eastern Front is becoming catastrophic. The Battle of Stalingrad has been lost and Soviet forces are pushing westward. But this creates another danger. Camps that do not produce goods important for the war effort are now being shut down. The Jewish workers are either executed or deported to examination camps. To save Blasov from this fate, Pemper develops a plan. First, he approaches Göth and strongly urges him to expand the camp's industrial production behind simple pots and pans. Schindler follows the advice and begins secretly producing grenade parts under the code name MU, but Pemper knows this alone will not be enough to save the camp, so he speaks with his friends Isaac and Nathan Stern and explains his idea. Płaszów must become an official concentration camp. Only concentration camps, he believes, are likely to continue operating until the end of the war. To achieve this, Pemper manipulates reports and statistics, making it appear as though Płaszów is producing large amounts of war-essential materials. Göth, who is far more intelligent than many assume, quickly realizes what Pemper is doing, but instead of killing him for it, Göth adopts the plan for himself. After all, he has no desire to lose his personal kingdom, and in the end the plan works. Płaszów is officially transformed into a concentration camp. For 20,000 prisoners, it becomes a new chance, a chance to survive. On December 11, 1943, Amon Göth celebrates his birthday. For the occasion, he has someone very special brought to the mansion. A well-known Jewish pianist who had only recently arrived at the camp is ordered to perform for him. Her name is Natalia Hubler. Before the evening begins, she is taken to the camp hairdresser, dressed up and prepared for the event. Then she is brought to Göth's mansion, where he orders her to play something for him. She chooses Nocturne in C-sharp minor. Göth is deeply impressed by her performance. As a reward, he allows Natalia and her sister to remain alive inside the camp. That evening, he even permits them to eat until they are full. Afterward, Göth repeatedly invites her to perform during parties at the mansion, but eventually he loses interest in her as well. One day she witnesses Göth setting one of his Great Danes on a prisoner while shouting, "Man, eat a dog." It is a phrase that had also been used by SS officer Kurt Franz in Treblinka. Christmas 1943 is spent by Göth inside Płaszów. At the time, behind his back, Isaac Stern, Oskar Schindler's chief accountant, secretly hands over a report about conditions inside the camp to two representatives of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. The men come up with a dangerous plan. They want to see the mass graves with their own eyes and gather proof for the outside world. Schindler contacts Göth and tells him that several important guests from the armaments industry are visiting Krakow. To celebrate the occasion, Schindler claims he is hosting a party that evening, and of course Göth is invited. The trap works. Göth, seeing another opportunity to impress influential people, walks directly into it. Later that night, in high spirits after the party, Göth personally invites the supposed armaments experts into the camp to inspect their workshops. He also agrees that Schindler's accountant, Isaac Stern, should guide the guest through the camp. During the tour, Stern carefully manages to lead the visitors close to the mass graves. Using a hidden camera, they secretly take photographs. The pictures are later smuggled to Budapest and eventually reach Palestine. Shortly afterward, Schindler himself secretly leaves Krakow, hidden inside the cargo compartment of a delivery truck. In his luggage is a handwritten report about conditions inside Płaszów, written by Stern's brother, Nathan. Later, the document becomes known as the Stern Report and turns into an important historical source. When Schindler returns to Krakow, he brings with him 50,000 Reichsmarks for the Jews of Krakow, money that prisoners secretly used to buy food for themselves and their families. Göth, fortunately, unaware of all these secret activities, celebrates New Year's Eve 1943 in his usual extravagant style. Once again, the party takes place inside this brightly illuminated mansion. Women in elegant evening dresses and men in SS uniforms fill the rooms. The Rosner brothers provide the music while expensive champagne flows throughout the night. One subject dominates the conversations that evening: the heroic struggle of the German army in Russia. But the news from the front is worrying. Still, the war feels far away and nobody wants to think too much about it. Shortly after midnight, the cheerful guests suddenly decide to take a walk outside in the cold winter air. The women wrap themselves in fur coats while the men put on heavy leather jackets. It's a freezing, clear winter night. A harsh eastern wind cuts through the darkness. Despite the cold, the group laughs and jokes together while, only a short distance away, countless prisoners inside the camp suffer from hunger, exhaustion and freezing temperatures. Death hangs over the camp, but the guests pay little attention to it. Then suddenly, the atmosphere changes. A column of female prisoners appears in the darkness. Bent over from exhaustion, they drag a heavy transport load through the snow past the commandant's mansion. It is one of 13 to 15 endless rounds during a brutal 12-hour night shift lasting from 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning. The cargo weighs nearly 9 tons of stone. The sight of the freezing women dress only in thin prisoner uniforms and using the last of their strength to pull the load through the snow affects at least one person that night, Ruth. Quietly, she whispers something into Göth's ear. For a brief moment, even Göth seems to recognize the absurdity of the situation. The guests look at him expectantly. Though only a short pause, Göth turns toward the couple leading the work detail. "End the work for tonight," he says. The women are then sent back to their barracks. It is far from the first wild party held inside Göth's mansion. According to Oskar Schindler, there are more and more of them during that winter. Schindler himself often helps provide enough alcohol and female company for the guests. Most of the SS and Gestapo men attending are willing to participate in almost any form of entertainment. During one winter night, a heavy snowstorm rages outside. One of the guests jokingly suggests throwing the women naked in the snow. Schindler himself is no innocent bystander either, and often takes considerable liberties during these gatherings. A survivor, Göth's housemate, Susanna Helen Sternlicht, later describes one disturbing incident during one of the parties. She is called upstairs inside the villa. There are 2 rooms there. One contains various exercise equipment. The other contains 2 beds. When she enters the bedroom, she finds Schindler laying naked beside a young woman. Schindler grabs her by the arm and attempts to pull her toward him. He repeatedly tries to force himself on her. She manages to escape only by desperately clinging to a large closet until he finally lets go. On January 10, 1944, Płaszów officially becomes a concentration camp. 600 SS guards, both men and women, arrive to replace the Ukrainian guards previously stationed there. Göth is proud of his new role as commandant of a concentration camp, but the promotion also brings many responsibilities because the SS economic and administrative main office now places far greater demands on him. Göth begins visiting other concentration camps to gather ideas and copy their systems. Soon, he introduces mandatory prisoner numbers and even establishes a brothel inside the camp, though it is reserved exclusively for the guards. The transformation into a concentration camp also creates an enormous amount of bureaucracy, much of which is pushed onto Mitek Pampa. At the same time, a new rule is introduced. The labor output of every prisoner must be now measured, at least in theory. This means prisoners can no longer simply be killed without reason as before. Every dead prisoner now reduces productivity of the camp's slave labor force. Because of this, executions officially require approval from Berlin. On February 12, Göth's friend and superior Julius Scherner is removed from his position. Himmler has learned about the drunken parties and orgies taking place in Płaszów and Chevigny and is reportedly furious. Scherner is reassigned to anti-partisan operations. For Göth, this creates a serious problem. Complaints and accusations against him continue to grow, and Scherner had always protected him in the past. Meanwhile, Germany's military situation becomes increasingly desperate. The Battle of Stalingrad has been lost. The German Sixth Army has been destroyed. During one dinner inside Göth's mansion, an SS officer noticed the strange relationship between Göth and Helen Hirsch. The officer secretly pulls Helen aside and tells her that, like all prisoners in the camp, she will eventually die. But according to him, Göth intends for her to be the very last Jew killed because he takes sadistic pleasure in prolonging her fear. Oskar Schindler's wife, Emily, later offers a different interpretation of Göth's behavior toward Helen. She believes Göth was deeply obsessed with her and beat her constantly to hide the fact that he actually had feelings for her. By March 4, 1944, the Red Army is advancing once again. On April 10, Soviet bombers attack the city of Lemberg. More and more Jewish prisoners are transported westward to other concentration camps. Many of these transports pass through Płaszów first. In the final days of spring 1944, Helena Sternlicht's mother dies from illness. When Susanna tearfully tells Ruth about her mother's death, Göth overhears the conversation. Surprisingly, he reacts with what appears to be genuine sympathy. "Susanna," he tells Helen, "I heard your mother died. I know what it feels like when a mother dies. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." A promise Helen would later remember. When Germany invades Hungary, Adolf Eichmann begins deporting hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz, but not all of them are meant to die immediately. The Nazis still need laborers. Because of this, concentration camps across the Reich are asked how many additional prisoners they can take in. Göth responds that Płaszów could receive 8,000 more Jews. At first, their request is rejected. The SS fears overcrowding could lead to disease outbreaks inside the camp, but Göth refuses to give up. He submits a new proposal. Płaszów, he says, could take 6,000 Hungarian Jews. If all prisoners considered too old, weak or sick for work are transferred to Auschwitz for what the Nazis cynically call special treatment. Göth's proposal is approved. On May 7th, he orders every prisoner in the camp to assemble for what is called a health inspection. Men and women gather separately. Although the weather is still cold, everyone is forced to undress completely. At a long row of tables sits the selection commission, some of Göth's most notorious officers alongside camp doctor Dr. Max Planke. Then the prisoners are forced through an obstacle course. Large holes have been dug into the ground on the assembly square. The prisoners must jump over them while the SS watches carefully. Anyone who falls into one of the pits is automatically placed on the transport list to Auschwitz. 1 week later, the camp is ordered to assemble once again. This time, it is the children. All of them are to be deported to Auschwitz. The scene is almost impossible to imagine. Parents scream in desperation while children are thrown onto truck beds like sacks of flour. At the same time, music blasts from loudspeakers across the camp. A waltz plays repeatedly. Mama, come back. One mother, unable to bear the loss of her child, cuts her wrist and dies directly on the assembly square. Afterward, the elderly and the sick are marched toward the waiting train wagons at Płaszów station. The trains will carry them directly to the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Around 1,400 old and sick prisoners, including 286 children, are deported that Sunday in May. In the days that follow, more prisoners are brought to Kraków-Płaszów and shot. All of this happens for one reason only: to make room for 6,000 Hungarian Jews. By mid-June 1944, fierce fighting is raging in Normandy against the Allied invasion forces. Germany's situation is becoming worse and worse. In the east, the Wehrmacht is already retreating on nearly every front. Because of this, higher SS and police leader Wilhelm Koppe orders Göth to prepare a new security plan for Płaszów concentration camp. Göth copies ideas from other concentration camps and, ironically, assigns Pemper to help draft the plan. But by now, Göth no longer cares much about orders coming from Berlin. He understands that the Reich is collapsing. From this point onward, he focuses mainly on his own survival and personal wealth. All those Nazis can go to hell, he reportedly says, repeatedly to his lover Ruth. At the same time, Göth's excessive lifestyle begins taking a toll on his body. Serious health problems appear. Dr. Gross prescribes him morphine, which Göth soon begins demanding more and more frequently. He also shows clear signs of diabetes and repeatedly suffers from exhaustion so severe that he is forced to rest for long periods. By early August, one thing has become obvious. Germany is going to lose the war. Göth now tries to move his valuables and stolen possessions to safety. 10 freight wagons are loaded with furniture, forecourts, artworks and luxury items before being sent toward Berlin and later Brünnitz. But the operation does not go unnoticed. Several dissatisfied SS men inside the camp report Göth to the authorities, accusing him of living like a king while German soldiers die at the front. The accusations eventually reach the notorious SS judge Konrad Morgen. The noose around Göth's neck slowly begins tightening. At the same time, Sonderkommando 1005 begins operating. Its mission is to destroy all traces of mass murders, including those at Płaszów. Meanwhile, Göth settles a few final scores and continues enjoying his last months as king of the camp. Executions at Kraków-Płaszów continue almost daily. The commandant's bloodlust is far from over, and yet, in one strange moment, Göth briefly shows what appears to be mercy. One day, Susanna notices a column of women being deported from the camp. Terrified that her sisters may be among them, she runs desperately to Göth. At first, he threatens her and orders her away. But suddenly, his attitude changes. "Go," he tells her quietly. "Don't look at me. We just received word that there are not enough train wagons available. Some women will have to remain behind." In the end, however, it is Ruth who truly saves Susanna's sisters after Lena begs her for help. Ruth secretly contacts the Jewish camp police and arranges for the women to stay behind. Later, Ruth confesses to Göth that she was responsible for helping Susanna's sisters. Göth reacts exactly as expected. He grabs his rifle and storms downstairs intending to kill Susanna. But Susanna is not there. Only Lena remains inside the mansion. When Susanna returns the next day, Göth's rage has already faded. "You were lucky," he tells her. By late 1944, the strange relationship between Oskar Schindler and Amon Göth becomes more important than ever. Both men now help each other survive in different ways. Schindler helps Göth move large parts of his stolen wealth and valuables out of Płaszów to safer locations before the collapse of Germany. In return, Göth helped Schindler compile what would later become known as Schindler's List, allowing Jewish workers to be transferred away from the camp and toward Schindler's new factory in Brünnitz. As shown in the famous movie, one final space supposedly remains open on the list. That empty place is intended for Helen Hirsch, but Schindler knows Göth will not let her go easily. So he gathers nearly all the money he still has left, takes a bottle of vodka and visits Göth in his mansion. The two men drink together and play several rounds of the card game 17 and 4. Then Schindler makes Göth an offer. If Schindler wins the next game, Helen will be allowed to leave with him. If he loses, Göth will receive twice as much money. But Schindler wins, and in the end, Göth agrees to let Helen go. Meanwhile, another problem is slowly becoming fatal for Göth. The mood among the SS guards has completely turned against him. Göth regularly brings his own men before military courts for even the smallest mistakes, creating growing hatred inside their camp staff. Eventually, several SS men come together and write a formal complaint against him. In the report, they accuse Göth of living like a king while others fight and die at the front. They also openly mention his black market dealings and stolen wealth. Then, at the end of August 1944, investigators discover the first hard evidence connected to Göth's illegal activities. SS Judge Konrad Morgen immediately launches an official investigation. From that moment on, consequences for Göth are only a matter of time. It is September 13, 1944. Helen Sternlicht is cleaning inside Göth's mansion when the doorbell rings. Standing outside, two German men in civilian clothing asking to speak with Amon Göth. They are Gestapo officers. Göth leaves with them without resistance. For Lena and Susanna, something almost resembling hope appears for the first time, only quietly, however, because they can hardly believe that a man like Amon Göth could actually be arrested. For several days, the women remain alone inside the mansion. Then suddenly, the telephone rings. Göth is on the other end of the line. His voice sounds completely different. The commanding tone is gone. He simply tells them to pack underwear and socks, because someone will come to collect them. Nothing more. At that moment, Lena and Susanna realize the truth. Göth has been arrested, and they have survived him. Shortly afterward, their luck improves even more. Both women are placed on Schindler's list. Göth is officially accused of stealing valuables and money from Jewish prisoners for personal enrichment, as well as illegally abusing prisoners inside Płaszów concentration camp. He is brought to Vienna, where SS Judge Konrad Morgen personally oversees the investigation. One of the first things investigators discover is the enormous amount of cash Göth is carrying with him, 80,000 Reichsmark. For the investigators, it is clear evidence that Göth has already been preparing for escape. When asked where the money came from, Göth reportedly answers, from Schindler. Because of the statement, Oskar Schindler is arrested as well. Schindler does not deny giving Göth the money, but claims it was only a loan. Still, the situation raises questions. Why would Göth need a loan from Schindler? Was it payment connected to transfer of Schindler's Jews to Brünnitz? Or were the two men planning something else entirely for life after the war? Whatever the truth may be, Schindler is released after only 8 days in prison. Göth and Julius Scherner, however, are brought before an SS honor court. In October 1944, Göth himself is released on bail. Scherner is degraded to reserve officer status and transferred as punishment to the infamous Dillewanger Brigade. The man who once received the Iron Cross dies on April 28, 1945, near Krakow while fighting partisans. Despite Göth's temporary release, the investigations against him continue. At the same time, his personal life begins collapsing as well. His wife, Anna Göth, has learned about his affair with Ruth Calder and now seeks a divorce. But Göth is being held in Dachau for part of the investigation and cannot properly deal with the legal situation in Vienna. Meanwhile, Ruth herself is also in Vienna and encouraged Anna to continue with the divorce proceedings. She wants Göth to officially confess to adultery, but before that can happen, the notary handling the case is unable to reach Göth. Instead, in late January 1945, Göth and Ruth travel together to visit Oskar Schindler in Brünnitz. The Jewish workers who survived Płaszów are horrified when they suddenly see the feared camp commandant standing inside Schindler's factory beside the director. Göth remains there as Schindler's guest for about a week before returning to Vienna. For the Jewish workers, their relief is enormous. They have seen him for the last time. Back in Vienna, Göth is not only dealing with the divorce, he is seriously ill, most likely suffering from an ulcer in the duodenum. While receiving treatment in a hospital, he is arrested once again by the SS field police and transferred to a police prison. Before that happens, Göth receives one final visit from his father. It is the last time the two men ever see each other. In February 1945, Göth is moved to a prison in Munich. He remains there for 5 weeks as new evidence against him is uncovered. Eventually, however, he is released once again and transferred to Anti-Aircraft Replacement Regiment 3. The Third Reich is already collapsing when Amon Göth is finally sent into military service for Führer and Vaterland. But Göth is lucky. He will not die a so-called heroic death. On April 30, 1945, the American 7th Army reaches Munich and captures the city with barely any resistance. Göth attempts to disappear before the Americans arrive, but he is captured. At first, the mass murderer pretends to be a simple farmer, but the Americans do not believe him. Still, at that moment, they do not yet realize who they have arrested. In August 1945, Göth falls ill with typhus, a disease spread by lice, apparently because he has no clean clothes to change into. Ironically, typhus had been one of the reasons the Nazis used Zyklon B, the same chemical later used in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, to disinfect uniforms and clothing. Göth survives the illness thanks to the treatment from American doctors. At the time of his arrest, Ruth is already pregnant from him. She spends her days in Bad Tölz preparing for the birth of the child. Then, on November 7, 1945, their daughter Monica is born. In December, Göth writes a letter to Ruth. My dearest Ruth, finally we are allowed to write, especially in early November. I thought of you constantly. It must have been so difficult. Poor you. And what did it become? A boy or a girl? I hope both of you are healthy. I am doing well. I hope we will see each other again in a few months. At this point, Göth still hopes the Americans will eventually release him because they still do not fully understand who he is. 2 days later, on December 19, his marriage with Anna officially ends. Soon afterward, Ruth receives another letter from Göth. Again, Göth writes calmly about food, money, tobacco, and everyday concerns, convinced that somehow everything will soon return to normal. In reality, however, his situation is becoming far more dangerous. Göth is initially imprisoned because the Americans mistakenly believe he served at Dachau concentration camp. Trying to secure his freedom, Göth cautiously admits where he actually worked, but minimizes and downplays everything. This turns to be out a fatal mistake. His statements put American investigators on the correct path. Very quickly, to discover that Göth had been the commandant of Płaszów concentration camp. Göth immediately changes his strategy. He now tries portraying himself as a fair and exemplary camp commander, claiming that prisoners in Płaszów were treated well and that only very few executions ever took place. According to him, those executions had merely been carried out by the Gestapo, but by now the Americans are deeply interested in uncovering the truth. And they find it. Soon, around 20 witnesses came forward and described the crimes, brutality of the former commandant. The survivors are brought together to Dachau to give their testimonies. There, they encounter Amon Göth once again, face to face. One witness later remembers, we entered the room and there was Göth, a large man, wearing a uniform far too small for him. A chill ran through us at the thought of being in the same room with him again. At that point, the Americans no longer have any doubt who Göth truly is. In May 1946, they extradite him to Poland together with Rudolf Höss, the former commandant of Auschwitz. When Göth arrives, an enraged crowd awaits him. The hated king of Płaszów has returned, only with great difficulty. Are security forces able to protect him from being lynched by the crowd? In August 1946, the trial against Amon Göth begins in Kraków. Huge crowds gather outside the courthouse and in the surrounding streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the monster of Płaszów. Inside the courtroom, most of the spectators are Jews, people who survived him. When Göth realizes who is sitting there, he reacts with cynical contempt. So, he says, they told us not a single of them would survive. The prosecution presents 5 main charges against him. First, as commandant of Płaszów, forced labor camp, Göth is accused of causing the deaths of around 8,000 people and personally participating in murders himself. Second, he is accused of carrying out the liquidation of the Kraków ghetto under SS officer Willi Hase and being responsible for around 2,000 deaths. Third, he is charged with organizing the liquidation of the Tarnow ghetto, ordering the deportation of 8,000 people and murdering an unknown number during the operation. Fourth, Göth is accused of ordering the murders connected to the liquidation of the Szczebine camp. And fifth, he is charged with stealing valuables belonging to the Jewish prisoners, including gold, money, clothing, furniture and other property, much of which was secretly transported into the Reich. The total value is estimated to have reached several million zloty. Many witnesses testify against him, but Göth also calls witnesses in his defense. Among them are former camp doctors, SS officers, his secretary Pemper and the Rosner brothers, and even Oskar Schindler. Schindler, however, wisely avoids traveling to Krakow himself. The city is far too dangerous for him politically. During the trial, Göth wears headphones while all questions and answers are translated for him. When asked whether he pleads guilty, he answers firmly no. His strategy is simple: deny everything. He claims that thousands did not die in Płaszów. He insists prisoners were never tortured or torn apart by dogs. He even states that no witness will be able to prove otherwise. According to Göth, there were never unjustified killings inside the camp. Regarding the theft of Jewish property, he argues that previous SS investigations had already found no sufficient evidence against him. While witnesses describe the horrors of the camp in detail, Göth appears calm and almost bored. At times, he even polishes his fingernails during the proceedings. He denies all personal responsibility and instead blames others, especially Julio Scherner and Willi Hase. Again and again, he insists he was merely a soldier following orders. Sometimes he even managed to unsettle witnesses by pointing out small inconsistencies in their memories of the time or place. But despite these moments, the overwhelming number of accusations leaves little doubt. Finally, the closing statement of the prosecution is read aloud. The exemplary punishment of this extraordinary criminal is not only the will of our people. With this verdict, the court will fulfill the will of the entire civilized world. Göth must disappear from this world because through his own actions, he removed himself from the community of those worthy of living in it. The prosecution demands the death penalty. Göth's lawyers have little left to say in his defense. Then, one final time, Göth himself is allowed to speak. He complains that he was not given enough time to find witnesses who could clear his name, claiming many of them are still imprisoned in Dachau. Once again, he shifts blame onto the war itself and insists he never had any personal reason to kill anyone. As camp commandant, he says he merely accepted responsibility for the actions of his men. At the very end, he even thanks the court and his defense lawyers for treating him correctly and respectfully. Then the judge asks him one final question. What sentence does the accused ask for? Göth calmly answers, I leave the verdict to the Supreme National Tribunal. 2 days later, the verdict is announced. The courtroom is packed when the judges finally speak. The Austrian citizen Amon Göth, born December 11, 1998 in Vienna, divorced, occupation private employee, Roman Catholic, is found guilty on all 5 charges and sentenced to death. All civil rights are permanently revoked. His entire property is confiscated. The execution is scheduled for September 30, 1946. To avoid riots, the exact time is kept secret. Shortly before 6 o'clock in the evening, Göth is led to the gallows inside Montelupich prison, a place where many Jews had once been murdered. His hands are tied behind his back. Then, suddenly, a strange problem occurs. The rope is too long. The executioners must remove the noose, shorten it and place it around his neck again. The moment carries a bitter irony. In Płaszów, prisoners had often suffered felt hangings as well. Only now, for the first time, Göth himself stands beneath the rope. Even then, the execution still proceeds more humanly than the hangings carried out in his own camp. Göth remains calm throughout. Only on the 3rd attempt is the rope adjusted correctly. Seconds before the trapdoor opens, Göth has time for just 2 final words. Words he lived by, and words he wants to die by. Heil Hitler. Amon Göth receives no grave. His body is cremated and the ashes are scattered into the Vistula River. Amon Göth, Moni, is finally dead. Years later, Göth's daughter Ingeborg reportedly tells her half-sister Monika that she still remembered how suitcases filled with jewelry and valuables were carried out of the apartment after the war. She also remembered an aunt with an enormous chest, stuffing jewels into her bra. According to the family story, much of Göth's stolen treasure was eventually hidden inside the summer house of his father, sealed away inside the walls forever. Of all the Nazi mass murderers, Amon Göth is maybe one of the most fascinating to study, if that is even the right word to use. Maybe that is because we know so much about him, about his childhood, his youth, and the person he was before he joined the SS. But psychologically, Göth remains an extraordinarily disturbing and contradictory figure. He was apparently capable of showing affection toward those close to him, such as his daughter Ingeborg, and there was even rare moments in which he seemed capable of showing compassion toward a Jewish prisoner like Helen Sternlicht, particularly when he could relate her suffering to his own, as in the case of losing a mother. He could present himself as a gentleman, intelligent, charming, and well-mannered. Yet there was another side to him, a much darker and deeply disturbing one, a capacity for brutality and sadism that is difficult to comprehend. As Helen Sternlicht later described him, he was like an animal. He killed like an animal, without mercy, seemingly always hunting for another victim. Göth could be sitting in the middle of a conversation and suddenly get up to shoot one of his prisoners for no apparent reason. Then he would sit back down and continue the conversation as if nothing had happened. And it went far beyond that. He was capable of murdering small children without hesitation. Prisoners also testified to acts of deliberate humiliation and cruelty, including forcing inmates to eat their own excrement. For Göth, violence appears to have become routine, sometimes even a form of entertainment. What we also see is a man who seemed to enjoy exercising absolute power over other human beings. A man operating within an ideology that had already taught him to regard Jews as enemies and as supposedly inferior. I am not a psychologist, and we should be careful about trying to diagnose a man who has been dead for decades, but it is difficult not to wonder where such extraordinary cruelty came from. Was Göth abused as a child? Was he beaten by his mother or his father? Did something happen to him at a school outside Vienna that shaped the person he would later become? What happened to him there? Or maybe there was no single explanation at all. Was there something within him from the beginning? Or was he simply a child who grew up in a relatively wealthy household with a car and domestic servants and eventually found his way into an ideology and an organization that allowed the darkest parts of his character to flourish? We will probably never know. What we do know is what Amon Göth ultimately became. A man responsible for bringing death and suffering to thousands. A man who remains one of the most disturbing symbols of Nazi terror. And a man who left wounds in the lives of those who survived him that many of them carried for the rest of their lives. Amon Göth.
This was my... I used to stand here and look out. This was the window. I used to envy people. They walked to work and I was all alone.